All right, everyone. Hey, this is Alicia from Parenting and Noir. It has been a little while since I've done one of these interviews, but this lady on camera with me today, I've had the pleasure of working with her for any number of years. I'm going to pause on the interviews for myself and let her have a moment to say a little bit about herself, including her parenting journey,
Good gosh, all that.
all of that.
So, who am I? I'll say that. Maybe I'll be interested in other folks' interpretation and perspective. My name's Lisa Stewart, and I have two children. I have a 15-year-old young lady and a 17-year-old young lady. And my parenting journey, if I use that as a starting point, is Mm. So it was 17 years ago, obviously, but I was in a situation, I was in graduate school. So what that meant, like in a real practical way, is I had the good fortune of not really working. Like, I was a TA or graduate assistant. So I did that and I was working on proposals. I did all that. But I didn't have to try to negotiate my first pregnancy with the demands of a traditional work. And so I saw my work as just being the healthiest possible being that I could be. So I was, doing aqua aerobics. I was getting acupuncture. I was doing, you know, pregnancy yoga. I was doing all the things. And so, because I had that, I had the luxury of time. I wasn't self-indulgent in time, but I had space. Um, and then I, one of my earliest memories was choosing the doctor, right? And um, asking, at first I made not a good choice. I went to have an appointment with this doctor. He clearly had bias towards men. He, like, the whole time he talked to my child's or father and never spoke to me. And so I was
You're
like,
like,
oh no, we're not
I'm,
having
and I am half
that.
of the reason why we're here, but no
We're
worries.
not having that. And so I went back to the hospital. It was a small town, right? So you could do these kind of things. I went back to the hospital, I went back to the floor because I had done the tour of the hospital and all that. And so I was like, I found a couple nurses and I just kind of pulled them to the side. I'm like, who y'all think I should go to? Like, who did you go to? Or you're seeing doctors all the time. Who do you get a good feeling about? And they told me. So made an appointment. I'm living in Charlottesville. Made an appointment, got my good friend who's actually my academic mentor. And me and her, we went driving into the countryside of Charlottesville, and we saw like horses, like people riding horses down the street. Like, it was really, there was this contrast. Like I was still adjusting to like moving from big city and the contrast of moving to Charlottesville, and then leaving the campus area, and then within a few miles, there's like people riding horses down the street, and we were like, this may be a little bit too much. Like, our wonder was, is he going to be an elitist? Is he like the doctor to the horse country rich? Because we were not. Um, but we went into his office and he had pictures of children of color on his walls. So it was like, okay, check, check, duly noted. Like, we were going through everything. We got into his office. He never rushed us. Check. Never rushed us. He had missing some fingers. And so our conversation was in the car. He knows about difference. He's differently abled. And based on the conversation, the environment, and all the things, we were like, okay, that's the doctor. And so that's kind of the like journey moment. If I had to write a book, I think that would be the starting point.
Very nice. And so with this doctor, obviously that you selected, how did the process play out? Was it as empowering as you wanted? So again, you're wrapping yourself, as you said, in all the holistic stuff, all of the nurturing things. And so was the pregnancy journey from the medical standpoint similarly, I guess, encompassing as what you were doing in terms of resources in the community?
My pregnancy was not how many people got a chance to manage it,
Hmm.
their pregnancy. And in fact, I live next door to like unofficial community center, heartbeat of the Black community in Charlottesville, which is called Mel's. It's a little eatery, and the after I delivered the night or morning that I delivered birth, my first call, it was like on a Friday, was to Mel's and say, "Look, I need two hamburgers and French fries." They closed at like 2 o'clock in the morning on the or 1 o'clock, something. It was late on the weekends. And my first career, I was like, I did all this work. And it was like I needed food, right? And they were a center of love. And I remember his brother Art, who is now passed, unfortunately, one of the nicest humans I've ever met. He was so happy. And Mel had recently his partner had given birth to their son. So it was like this big family thing. So there were for so many reasons, it was like a real special experience about being in Charlottesville and in a small town where
Hmm.
people could care for you
Hmm.
differently. And everyone was just so interwoven and locked in. Um, that made it really special for me.
And so you're in a community that you again have the benefit of being in a small community and some of the nurturing environments that again you likely would not experience in the big city. And we'll talk a little bit about your birth story for your second daughter so that you can say if there were differences. But was family, and I mean blood relatives, present for this journey with you, or was it really the comfort and the nurturing that you got from the community members?
So great question, because now I have like chapter two, if I were writing a book, or scene two, if it was a play. So my mother was in town, and their dad was in town. My mother lived in Ohio. Their dad lived in DC, so 2.5 hours away. So so mom was in town. Their dad was in town, and I was in a birth, and I was in a tub, right? So it was a hospital room that had a huge tub and a huge bathroom. And so I just remember, like, for me, how I deal with physical pain is I go deep and I moan. Like I go into like a very primal kind of guttural sound production. And so I remember making them say "Om," right? And I was like "Om," and I was like, "No, I need you guys to say it louder." So
So you're like being a drill sergeant
I'm
while
being
you're
a drill
laboring.
sergeant
You're like, this is my experience.
around
I have a
meditative
choir.
practices, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Which was
Yep.
not their flavor, right? Like, and so and so I totally heard them, and they were doing such a good job, bless their heart,
They're just like,
of holding and creating this sonic space for me, right?
uh.
So, so I stayed in the water as long as I could, then moved to the bed, and then I never had an epidural, but and then yeah, I gave birth to my firstborn.
When we think about coming into the parenting journey, often in the olden times, I'll say we were surrounded by the villages. It was women who were often stay at home moms, kind of laboring, having their mothers, other women in the community there. So this almost gives me that surrogate feel to you having that nurturing community around you. Um, would you say, if we fast forward a bit to the journey into motherhood the second time with your youngest daughter, was there a similar vibe in terms of you feeling like, ah, I've done all the things and I have all the time and all, that type of feeling, or do we start to enter into different terrain with the second experience?
Woo! Oh boy, the contrast. when I was with some of the women who were at my baby shower in Charlottesville, um, and I shared my daughter's name, which my daughter's name is Zoli. She,
And can you tell us what that means?
well, it's very interesting. A woman said that Zoli meant firstborn. And I totally laughed. I was like, "You crazy. I'm not having any." Because remember, I'm old as heck.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "No, it means it's firstborn." I'm like, okay. Because then there was a secondborn.
Mm-hmm.
So um, by the time of my second pregnancy, I was living back in the DC area. And was, I had like a really hard time finding a doctor that I liked. Like, so remember, I go from this like family doctor, countryside
Mm-hmm.
family doctor. Um, and I ended up with a practice that I never quite felt comfortable with. I saw probably three doctors while I was there, so I never had that one on one kind of relationship. I was high risk because of my age. I started having complications. So then I was really became high risk for medical reasons. And and I began being seen by all these specialists, fetal cardiologist, and perinatal practice that just specialized in high risk. So I was monitored very closely, very frequently. And I went into the hospital at about, I think, around 28 weeks. Um, and they said then their aim was to keep me in the hospital until I made to like 29 weeks. Like it was like a week by week, you know. And I was like, oh, they don't know. They don't know me. They don't know. I'm not having this baby now. There's no way I'm having a baby at 28 weeks. Like that's not gonna be my story.
Mm-hmm.
And so my body cooperated, and and I went home. And then shortly before I was due to deliver, a few weeks, they took me off high risk, which was weird. I was like, I don't understand why you, as someone gets closer to.
Yeah, they were like, good luck to you.
Yeah,
We have,
exactly. And that's exactly how I felt. And I remember when I delivered, um, I can tell things weren't just going right.
mm-hmm.
So very different. It was a C-section, and compared, the first one was a vaginal. Um, yeah. Um,
And you knew going in that it would likely be a C-section birth, or was it a surprise?
she was always turned in a way that was difficult for them to see on the sonogram,
Mm-hmm.
and they they didn't know. Like they really just didn't know. So we all assumed that she was still turned that way,
Mm-hmm.
but she's a smart person in life, and she made the last minute turn. But we didn't know that. So that was basically the reason, that because the last time I had been seen a few days earlier, she was still in a position that would have been dangerous for her. So
Interesting as we think about the medical model, that they wouldn't have done a last check before going into the more invasive procedure. But yeah, here we find ourselves.
here we find ourselves. So so I we went to the delivery occurred at a hospital that was not wasn't equipped to deal with high risk pregnancies and high risk births. So she was there for 7 days. And during those 7 days, they tried everything. I mean, her color was just never that good. And they gave her everything. And instead of just saying, like, hey, she was seen by a fetal cardiologist, she was seen by this perinatal practice. Why don't we all put our heads together and get her out of here? Yeah, if you don't believe my story, we can just make a few phone calls. Let the other folks who have a relationship with her, even though the relationship was in utero, have a relationship with this case. We can all talk about it. So on the 7th day, though, we got a call, and she was transported to a hospital that was equipped to take care of her needs. So, but from the moment, and this was chapter 3 in the book, Act 3, is like as soon as she was disconnected from my body, the medical establishment viewed it totally differently. It was like I crossed the bridge, or we crossed the bridge, and no one in perinatal land wanted to talk to us anymore. I couldn't get the docs on the phone. I just wanted to know, by the time we got to NICU, I wanted all these people to be talking.
Which makes sense.
Her case did not begin when she came out of me. Her case had history. And I need you guys to pay attention and know the history, right? I did so much work, Alicia, to try to get
advocacy at a time that is stressful and just uncertain.
Is it really that hard to get the doctors? Why are you making this separation? This is a journey, a continuum. Why can't you talk? I do believe that people really were concerned about malpractice. I didn't even have that on my mind.
You're like, I'm not even at that place. But unfortunately, the sad part is likely that they've had people who likely were not at that place in their history, and then they got there, and so you're penalized because of other situations.
And can I tell you, at the perinatal practice, I was going every week. Those folks were like extension of my tribe, and then all of a sudden they're not returning a call.
Yep. They're like, you're not ours anymore.
They're not returning a call.
Yeah.
So that was like really shocking. Like when you talk about the contrast, you asked about the contrast. So it was that. So I was thrust in this, in the most extensive and most, of interventions. I went from like taking my aqua aerobics and getting my acupuncture to like, boom, we're here.
Yeah.
And so
you're navigating a system that is essentially not playing by rules that you're aware of. There's no playbook.
Not human, rules based on humanity. So it was very, 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 very jarring. Now there were actors, people in that journey who were part of that, who were extraordinarily humane. Like the NICU doctor we had, amazing. He cried with us and this guy was like, when I asked him what do we do? I mean, we're in NICU, what do we do? And this guy who was the person, if you walked into a room with a crowd, he'd be the person who I would say, just on some superficial stuff, the least spiritual, right? And he was like, pray. I was like, oh shit, he said pray? I need to do some work. That a doctor, a believer, and the spirit of medical awesomeness told me that's my work. Like,
Yeah.
okay. And he was the, I mean, fortunately, he had trained with the doctor who essentially developed this intervention,
Hmm.
early in his career. And, but he sat there and cried with my daughter's dad, you know, who was processing it, everything that was going on in very different ways than I was, and that was awesome to have like that kind of male support because everything is so focused on the woman, the mom, and the baby. Um, but there was lots of humanity in small but big ways that were expressed in within this system that is not that.
Hmm. And so, if this again were a book or a play, this would be when we have a moment where you pause and then we do a flashback. So, I want to take you back to your days in Charlottesville. So, we're gonna go through your second daughter's journey in those early days. But I want to hear, just so that, again, for the audience, there's that foil type scenario where those first 2 years between the birth of your first daughter, firstborn, not only born, and your second, between that 2 year period between the birth of one and the other, what was it like for you in terms of being the mom and raising a child and then prepping for a second?
Right. So there's 20 months between the two. Um, so, and 9, 10 months of that is pregnancy. so,
So you had a
so I had,
small window of
so I
time.
had a small window. So what was the time like? Oh my God, it was scary. Like I hadn't done like a lot of babysitting.
Hmm.
My life was never focused on children. I'm a only child. I had cousins, but not many of them younger than me. I was on the younger side of my cousin lineage. Um, Cousin line, I should say. So I didn't know like how to hold the baby, how to like, oh, it's crying, what to do. And I was like in Charlottesville, dad's back up in DC, mom's back home. Also
You're
should
still
say
in
that
school.
still in school, but not like really studying. Like all my coursework is done. And I should mention they had a number of close friends who came down from DC. Chris, who you met, was one. And when I had the baby, so that was nice love that came down.
Hmm.
Um, and I just remember these days of me and her in the room just looking at each other. We're just looking at each other.
Hmm. And
Um,
both of you like, so hey, like what
yes. And
what's
I
up?
remember the day that she looked at me and she was like, okay, I gave you some time. Now you're going to step up and be my mama. Like, I remember like, it was like, this is look. And I was like, I guess that's what we're gonna
You were
do. And
like,
I'm
so
like,
you figured out that I was play acting
yeah, yeah. You like
those weeks or
I
months.
gave you
Yeah,
some
she was
time,
like,
but now you step into that. None of this
yep,
doubt. You step into being a mama.
yep. Hmm.
But there was again small town. I lived on Main Street, literally, and I could walk downtown, and everything was like in one little town square, almost plaza. And one day I went to the post office, and she was crying. And I was like, oh God, we are like in this long line. Like, really? We almost made it to the counter. Why are you crying? And there was this woman in line. She was checking it out. And I was trying to like comfort her and all that. So we get out of the post office and I'm walking back home up Main Street because the end point of Main Street is downtown, right? So walking back, same lady, I see her. She passes me on the sidewalk and she looks at me and she says, "That baby is hot." And she said it in a thick accent. I can still hear it ringing in my ears because it was like I just felt so ashamed. Like she had been looking at me and my parenting skills, and she was in her head. She was like, "Girl," she's like, "That baby is hot." And I was like, but I thought, someone said you got to keep the babies
Keep
covered,
the
right?
babies bundled, and your
You got to
baby's
keep
like,
the baby.
oh.
And she was like, "That baby's hot. That baby's hot." And it was like, okay, let's take her out. And she's,
And then she's like, "And freedom, thanks,
and
thanks."
I remember like, dang, this stranger just called me out. And I went back to my little apartment and was like, there, like feeling like bad mama, bad mama.
Hmm. And it's
But
so
I mean, there
sad
was
for us. But I was going to say, and we'll get a little bit further into the good, bad parenting discussion a little bit later on. But it's interesting that instead of in that moment, and I can flash back to some things that have happened to me in my mothering journey, where instead of being like, "Wow, thank you for coming out of nowhere, nice angel, and helping my baby," we internalize it as I should have known that already. When, like you said, you're an only child, you're one of the younger kids, you're not surrounded by kids. How, like, this stuff is not
right.
osmosis. Like, we don't, as soon as the baby comes out, get this all of these juices and knowledge and all the shiny bits imparted into us, but we internalize each and every step of this process as I didn't do the right thing, I should have known this, I should have done better. And so for people who are listening, if you felt that way early days of your child's experience, or even now, it's real. A lot of us just automatically beat ourselves up versus recognizing that, thank you for being there to point out something that I probably would not have been aware of. But continue.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm so glad you brought that up because there is this myth that parenting, mothering is natural. It's a natural instinct natural instinct to want to mother, and a natural instinct to do the mothering, to do
To
active
do it.
mother. It is crazy town, right? Like, so, and then we had this wrinkle of um, my youngest could never drink a lot of milk. She could never take a lot from me. And I thought it was me, maybe. Yeah. So then we go through the litany of things.
Mhm.
Oh, I gotta take this to increase my milk production. Or maybe it's the flavor, or she doesn't like something in the milk. I can't eat things. Maybe you try to do the diet elimination, figure out what she may or may not. And it was none of that. So then I was like, okay, let me go to formula. I ended up getting on formula earlier, and that's a whole other thing, earlier than I had intended. I was like, she's not drinking enough, da da da. And as this is like, as the baby's age, the amount of milk that they drink. And so she was still where she should have been at like 8 ounces. She was still drinking 2.5 ounces. And I was like, oh my God, my baby is just, what am I doing? I went to goat's milk. I did all the things.
Everything.
So what we didn't understand at the time, and not for a long time, was she didn't have the muscle strength to suck. So after 2.5 hours, the reason she capped
Just
out,
like,
that's when her muscles were like, they're done. Like
mhm.
she didn't have that. And so I was like, oh my God. Well, that would have totally changed. I would have tried to feed her 2.5 ounces
Mhm.
more,
More
in
like
quicker
with the
time intervals, right? So, yeah, there was that. So, and in my head, I was like, I didn't realize this, but I had bought into the mythology of like you just know how to parent and it just happens, right? And then over time, it just became real apparent to me that just I needed I needed support. I needed
Mhm.
So I left Charlottesville and came back to DC at that point.
Okay. How did you begin to really catch your stride? So I know, and thinking like, okay, I don't know what I don't know, but like we're winging it pretty well. Was there a period of time where you're like, okay, we're kind of into that spectrum versus the constant, kind of self I don't even want to say it's self beatings, but it almost feels like that. It's like you're mentally beating yourself for things that you aren't doing or what you think you aren't doing appropriately.
No, I never felt like. Let me before I answer that quickly. Did I feel like I hit my stride? Um, no. I thought there was a constant like learning. It was
Hmm.
constant. When I moved to DC and became pregnant with my second one, as I said, so I was doing a lot of medical appointments then. Um, and then when she was born, um, after she came out of NICU, there was there was a lot of hospitalizations and medical appointments. So like, I felt like my life was organized around that, and I was trying to play catch up or still do, you know, parent the firstborn. But I can tell you, like in terms of magical people in my story, in my journey, um, there was a time where we had night nurses in the home, and they were from nursing agencies, predominantly from Ghana, Cameroon, um, yeah, uh, and they were they provided so much strength. They would walk in the home and we would sit up. I was supposed to be sleeping there, night nurses. It was like,
Hmm.
and we would stay up and talk, and they would just impart in me um, strength and comfort. Um, yeah,
And was this
extraordinary.
with your first or your second daughter?
This is what my second.
Okay. At a time
This,
when you probably really needed it.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
That's
They were,
cool.
yeah. It was
And
amazing.
so I know we've also talked in the past about complexities and the things that make our lives and our journeys, whether parenting or just overall existing, more complex. So when we think about your daughters, you've also mentioned that you've had layers with them in terms of various types of complex needs. So can you talk a little bit about those experiences and how those and you don't have a way to say, well, this is what the parenting journey would have been like if it wasn't for that. We'll never know that. But just thinking about the various, like I said, layers and complexities that you've navigated with your children, how what were they and kind of how did you manage them? Were they simultaneous needs or did they um happen at different times?
They were simultaneous. Managing goes into like that bucket of work life balance, like all these kind of fictional kind of places that that become a marker of comparison or metrics for how well you're doing, and you can't do it. I never felt like I was managing. I mean, I would go to appointments all the time, hungry. Like I remember just like it would take everything to get to the medical appointment, Um, getting out the house, packing for the house, packing enough. She had like equipment we had to carry around. So making sure you had the battery packs, making sure like because you never knew if one appointment might turn into a hospitalization. You may go, you may leave thinking you just going to an appointment, and then you end up they're like, no, we're hearing something. We think you need to stay, or we need you to
Mhm.
go down to ER, um, or a referral to another clinic. And like, there was never a simple day, like on those days. And so, that meant I was showing up with, probably hadn't eaten, probably hadn't hydrated, probably hadn't done anything, just get to the appointment. And then like trying to hear stuff
Mhm.
that was like pretty complex. I needed to pay attention to, right? But I couldn't. Like, it's that how much does a patient or a caregiver hear what a provider saying when they're carrying, a big weight into the room. I had situations because I became a parent navigator within our care system, and I worked with families that had medically complex children. I remember a day where I met a parent of a family of a child who I was working with, and they were in the emergency department. And the mom was worried because she left work, right? She worked at a gas station and she didn't close up shop,
Mm.
and she was going to get fired if she didn't close up shop, right? And and I drove her to, because I don't know how she got there. She didn't get, she didn't have transportation. I drove her to her job for her to properly sign out and get the stuff in order. We had to leave the baby there, but the mama couldn't get fired.
Yeah.
And our team had already worked to get her furniture and, you know, and then we got back, and it's these kind of mamas who are called on for child protective services and stuff. And, or when mamas, I had plenty of mamas that, not plenty, but I had mamas that I worked with who security had to call, but people aren't reading the situation, right? What they're not reading is her stress. People are not comfortable with people having emotions under duress.
When,
Watching these
yeah.
parents being labeled as like bad problem, whether it's medically non-adherent or it's like, yeah, they had to bring their other kids to the hospital because no one could care for them. If they're going to be with their baby, like, so how are we going to manage this, right? So what that experience, no matter how challenged I was, by the time, I mean, I didn't immediately become a navigator, but by the time I did, and my kids were still really young, that I just had nothing but gratitude, like really. I
Now,
mean,
did you become a navigator due to your own experiences and the things that you didn't
yeah,
know or experience in the system?
yeah, because I was always asking questions and showing up places, and so my daughter's pediatrician saw that as a value, bless her heart, and so she approached me and said, "Would I be interested in becoming a navigator for families in their complex care program?" And so I did.
But if we can pause and just give a small high five to that doctor, because often we don't have providers, clinicians who are receptive to the numerous questions and thinking instead of this is an inquisitive brain that could also be used for someone who doesn't know even one question to ask versus the 5,000 that may be needed. And so just to give that individual props, I don't know what your other experiences were, but to see that in you and to recognize there was a program, services, and opportunities that your skill set would be uniquely of benefit to others. And so I do appreciate hearing that, because often we are shut out by doctors when we ask them questions, because some think like, oh, well, you're challenging my authority or my expertise and my
Yeah.
experiences. And so
Yeah, no, we had extraordinary care. My other daughter's pediatrician, they didn't have the same practice with different pediatricians. She and I worked on a research study together. Like yeah, it was a good relationship all around with that practice.
I love it. And so that sounds like a lot that you were navigating. And so for your youngest with some of the complex medical needs that were there, what did that mean for your older daughter?
Oh
So
my
what,
gosh. So she started biting in nursery school and they kicked her out.
Mm.
And that was basically her saying, "Where are you guys?" She
Don't
was
forget about me.
upset. Like she was like, "My world ain't right," you know. And that was the best that she could do to express that.
Yeah.
Um, and we had an amazing nanny, Esther, who I remember like on the spot. It's like, "You're hired." I think my youngest was in the hospital. I came home. We had biting going on at the nursery school, and then this angel walked up, named Esther, and I was like, "Good. She can." I felt comfortable. She became a rock. So that allowed me that I had the ability to do that, right? But you know, and childcare is so doggone expensive.
Yeah. But
Another
it's a
element
sacrifice
of
you have to
the
make. If you
inhumane,
can
yeah,
make it, you're in a position to do
yeah,
so.
the inhumane systems. But it was, if I can use this as an opportunity to pivot a little bit, um, it was through this experience, this part of our experience, that it became really clear I can't do this by myself.
Hmm.
And it was the moment, I remember the moments. My, we used to, so Zoli was in a nursery school. That was more of a full day program, but we had belonged to a co-op. I'm pointing because it's actually, we moved not down the street from it. So a cooperative nursery school, parents volunteer. It kind of felt more like an activity than a nursery school because you only went a couple hours, a couple days a week, right? Like it was cute like that, but extraordinary, right? And so, but because it's centered on a cooperative model, people like really meant it. So when they asked me how was I doing, one day I just stopped and said, "I'm not doing well."
Mm.
And one day someone said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes." And I remember that like moment because I had to decide
Yeah.
to say yes
Versus pretending, which many of
versus
us do.
pretending.
Yeah.
And so they saw me, they saw, and so, and it was simple. It was just like, "Please take her home with you today because my other kid is being discharged and I never know what time of day that's going to happen. And I just need a place for her to go." And they're like, "Sure, of course."
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that I or you or anyone would do, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
I mean, like that we would do for others, but somehow it gets complicated when it's extended to us and we get
Oh
to,
yeah.
we're uncomfortable with choosing it. So when I chose that, I remember the saying like, it's don't block someone else's blessings. Don't block
Hmm.
the blessings, right? And I was like, wow, I am blocking their blessings, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
I put myself more centrally within this chain of giving and receiving that made the it made all of it richer
Hmm.
being on both sides of that. I was very fortunate, to be in community like that.
But for people to be perceptive enough to reach you and say, are you okay? Do you need help? That's the first thing. For many of us, we pass by, we see someone that we can tell is actively in distress, but because of all the social norms we have, you only want to hear about the good stuff and you don't want, to sometimes get loaded on or not even being prepped to help a person. So for someone to step to you and then to be able to meet you at the place you were at and to give you that assistance that perhaps they didn't know you were going to say yes, and then for you to enunciate, I need you to take care of my child. There are sometimes no-win situations, and as you say, CPS gets called and all sorts of stuff because it's a no-win. There's going to be a choice that you feel may not be the most optimal, but a choice still has to be made. Like, not doing nothing is not an option often for us. And so it is appreciated that we do stumble across those angels, those little assistants on our road and our journey that are able to see us in that moment, to accept us in that moment, and to offer actual tangible assistance. So kudos to the individual who helped you out in that experience. And so then my question, moving from, again, some of those, like I said, informal touchstones that we've had with people along the way, what was the work environment like? Because we can't forget that all of these things cost something, money, you need insurance. So what was going on work environment wise when you're dealing with, again, two children, one with complex needs? You've got to be present and do all the things to make sure that things don't go off the rails. So what was work like, and how supportive or not was your work environment?
Well, so that was part of the reason why I took the job as being a navigator, because it was flexible hours and because there was built-in understanding that there's a lot of uncertainty in my life and the other navigators' life day to day, And so, and we were within the system. So sometimes we could take care of some of our needs while we were at work, like but can't imagine any other kind of working arrangement. It was enough social connection that it kept me uplifted. And as I said, and grateful. And I was also close to information, right? Like, so I had some benefits there, but I can't even imagine. Like, and I wasn't working full time at all, but I was working enough. I think it's really, really, really hard to ask for the help. Like, I mean, what the learnings in the valleys, if you allow yourself to be open to them, is that I have to do things a different way, right? And that fundamentally we're all interdependent on one another. That community, that as a value, seems to have diminished over the years, at least how I think people still talk about it. But the act of the stuff that creates depth in relationships, the exchange that happens, you in a situation, I help you, I'm in a situation, you help me, and we do that enough, then it's unsaid. We just do. We just step in and do. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like those connections are just not as durable as they once were.
But yeah, so what are some of those lessons learned for people who may not quite be in your circumstances, but perhaps from the system and the parents that you served? Any of those models that can help those folks? Like, I don't know what to do, just to help them move forward in the process.
Your mommy networks, or you're just talking to people. People are going to be your biggest resources. Information is everything. It is everything. So there are so many points, whether it's choosing the nursery school or choosing doctors or different approaches that you could use to address something. Or, we would meet people. I'm now talking about their dad and I would meet people throughout our stays in the hospital that were just indispensable to giving us the right information we needed at the time, right? Or knowing like, ooh, I better remember that. So I just can't say enough about that. And that's another reason why we can't hide in shame, because then we're not having certain conversations, because we're walking around with a veneer of we know it all, even though that may not be what we're projecting. We want to seem like we have it together, not know it all, but at least have it together. So I say that's a number. Just talk, 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 talk. Talk to folks. Truly believe that there are seasons. There are seasons to life. And it may seem like there's a real long winter going on, but there will be shifts. There will be shifts. But it does require kind of a recalibration of what your vision may be for, like, not only how you thought your parenting journey might be, but who are you? You asked a question about like finding yourself in this whole thing, because I went through a period where I was like wholly unrecognizable to myself, and everything that was a part of my identity formation I no longer had or could do. I worked in a field where there was a lot of being in public spaces and a lot of being at events and a lot of things that I really enjoyed, but certainly I just didn't have space for that anymore. So there was a loss. I went through like a real serious period of loss, of knowing that this was the next phase, and I identity as like, who am I? So I also think there is a piece of like giving people an opportunity to stand up, right? So, and because you never know where assistance is going to come, or just support is going to come from. And like going back to that block, that don't block folks as blessings. What was so seminal about that moment of me accepting help is that it put me on a path, and it was a slow path, but it put me on a path of being more true to me. It put me on a path, because there's a heavy burden to acting like you got it all together, right? There's a
Yes.
heavy burden. When we are able to say that, we're able to be more true and clear in other aspects of our lives. We then start living into that differently. I think we just start showing up differently.
And I think also one of the most interesting things is, and this is something I hope folks hold on to, is that people, like you said, there are different seasons in your life, and so there are also different people for different seasons. You again, I've heard the quote that people are in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Just because someone is in your life for a lifetime doesn't mean for that specific season they're the best for that particular terrain. And so that means that you can still have that supportive person that's there, but they may not be your go-to for the parenting side of life. They may be that person that consistently reminds you of who you were and who you are. And so there
Mm-hmm.
are ways that they can meet you where you happen to be at that moment, but that they may not be everything at the same time to you. And so that took a lot for me, as that it's not that you're losing old friends or that you've grown away and out of people. It just may be at that time that the circle you have maybe just focus on that mom, the moms of those 2 or 3 years, because that's right where you are. And your friend who maybe doesn't have kids, it may not be that they can give you what you need, but that may also be the friend that when you have a baby free weekend, you call them and they're like, I was waiting for the call, let's do something. And for us,
Yeah.
um,
What I love about that is when I would go out when my kids were young, people like had no idea like what was going on with me, because when I
you were
went out
out.
to have a good time.
Right. Right.
I was not going
It was
out
not going to be crying on your
to talk
shoulders.
about all that stuff. And
Oh.
people were like, "Oh, we didn't know." Da, da, da. I was like, "Yeah, because I live. That's my household stuff."
Hmm.
But when I go out, I am laying like the old blues song. I'm laying my troubles
Yes.
down, and we are not
Yes.
that. And we
Yes.
got to do that. Like we got to create our separations and still connect. And little like one of the things that was like I really created like a real serious physical practice. Like and it was like it saved a big piece of me. And the only reason I was able to do that because I would have to drop my daughter off at the rehab center, and I didn't have anything to do all day. I was like, well, let me go work out. This building's like up the road, and I would do that, and that was like, whoo, whoo. Now I can bring something new to the
Hmm.
situation. But
Hmm.
yeah, they're all teachers. I mean, we got to talk about well, this part of the journey is just it's just the beginning part, right? And then what comes after. I think it's really important to note, given the title of this fantastic show that you're producing, Alicia, to talk about like what might be distinct about, or what I think might be distinct around parenting
Hmm.
and Black is well, a lot of it does have to do with economics.
Yep.
There's a couple things emerge, and I'll go through them. One, I mean, I feel like in this conversation, this broad conversation about parenting, like the most invisible of the invisible are parents, largely mothers, who are in this role of taking care of their children with special needs. Like I said, I worked for several years with families that had children of all ranges, but a number of them having nonverbal, non-ambulatory children. And because of, medical advances, children are living longer, and there's all kinds of challenges that poses on the system with transition, because there wasn't the life expectancy might not have been as long as it is now. So there's not an adult care system that's really there to catch and care for them. But the you asked about, like, how did I work and da. I mean, many people can't, right? And so there's this severe economic impact that our system doesn't address. That is real. That is really challenging. On, there's certain, we're talking here about certain conversations or revealing, like, our need for help and being real and authentic about that. It becomes like way more difficult when there is one child who requires a lot of resources, energy, and other financial resources, all kinds of resources, care resources. And then there's other kids in the household who are not getting an amount of attention that they may need to thrive because of it. But we can't really talk. Where do you talk about that? Like, you statistically, yeah, people always say, like, I would see it, married couple, I may start working with the married couple, and then there was only one parent I was working with at some point later, because that relationship didn't do well under the stress of caretaking and having different ideas about what needs to be done, or different levels of acceptance. So that's where, my heart really goes out to families who really aren't seen. And then there's the, parenting in Black. Okay, so also about our, just cultural things, like all the things I heard around, like, oh, oh, just put butter on it, or like it could be all kinds of things. Like, you want her to get fat, just put butter. I'm like, it's a little bit bigger than butter, or like, certainly our aversion to labels, which I completely get. I completely understand that, but it can't be sometimes that is the barrier to getting, services that our children need and can benefit from, that will alter the trajectory of their life. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just hopeful that we are moving in a space where we can have more conversations about how we are different, how certain people abilities that we have, how that's all widely accepted. We always have widely accepted differences. We've always done that, but we just didn't have a language for it. And then medicine comes up with a language, and then the language doesn't feel good all the time. So, but the language is an access to things that may be able to provide benefit. So those are just some of the things that I think are just, like, really kind of unique to our experience, is the economics, just where we are economically, and our difference culturally that stand out.
But just shifting into another direction, and I know we're coming close to time. We have talked about things like mommy guilt and perceptions of parenthood. So I want to have a no holds barred conversation with you about good and bad parenting, and what does that mean to you? What are some of these phrases that we hear thrown around, and what is your perception of parenthood, and has that changed from, let's say, the time right before your first child came into the world to where you are now, as you've gone along a good portion of this journey with them, at least into their younger adult years? But what is your perception of this good, bad parenting, mommy guilt, all of these things?
That's so much a part of the individual imagination, that most people are not judging other people. And so there's, like, this, like, little paranoia, like, oh, somebody else is thinking that I'm a bad mommy, right?
They're like, we're
And
working
then
on
that ain't
you.
happening. They're thinking about the next
Right.
thing.
Or they're not thinking anything at all
They're not
about
thinking
you.
anything. So let that go. I try and think, where do I have mommy guilt? I don't feel like I have mommy guilt, but I am intense about finding resources and stuff. I'm really tuned into you only get one try at this thing,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I don't let it crush me. You know what I mean? Like it's not I don't let but I am like cognizant of like, okay, there's some things that would work well now. Let me try to maximize this moment. But I am just learning, like I am like with in a very like real time moment, I am learning to relax a lot more about that. A lot more about that. Because now my kids can say, you need to relax about it. There's one thing to say that and then handing over slowly, like they do in medical transition, slowly give more responsibility over and hand it over and be okay with that. And be I am being more self-reflective about when I'm not doing, oh, this might be a time where I'm not doing that. I'm not good at it yet because my instinct is still in to get in there and do things, but I'm trying to listen a lot more and the conversation changes. Like you want, like you certainly, I think I defaulted as most of us do back to like the stuff we even didn't like that our parents did, right? Like, and
Hmm.
so we're like, oh, where'd that come from? Oh, I said I wasn't going to do that. Oh,
Yep. And here we
and
are.
then it's like, oh, and then so I definitely have that streak of like it's a top down kind of thing, and this
Hmm.
is what respect looks like, and
Hmm.
this is what we got to do. And I, but I know that that doesn't have a lot of power. It certainly doesn't have a lot of power now, and probably never did. Like how to build up intrinsic motivation is a hard
Hmm.
one. You know, it
Hmm.
takes more time. It takes more conversation. Like it takes. Like, no, you just go do that. Because I said, and if you respect me, you would do that.
Yep.
so, so, so I'm having different conversations. I'm finding I'm having like, okay. So what are the consequences of that? Why are you choosing that? Like, because I like particularly around the phone. Like I can't stand that thing. You know, seeing it attached to them,
Yep.
and I've been saying it for the beginning of time in their life, and so but I can no longer do timeouts or take the phone away, like because it's just like water. They just find another way
Right.
to log on, so it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
So, what is the intrinsic motivation can they develop to put it down or find curtail their use or minimize their use? Like, where does that come from? And so that's a longer conversation and a different kind of conversation. So
And that's just the growth and evolution of them as a whole, whole beings. That at
yeah.
a certain point, you can't just say, because I said so. It is a conversation. You're growing people that you want to go out into society and be and do things. And so it can't be just you as a dictator, telling them everything. And so you have to recognize in that as a part of their growth is your growth and seeing that you can suggest courses of action, but they may choose to do it differently. And is it okay if they go a different path, but it still reaches the natural outcome? And that's the growth and evolution in the parenting journey, is that we forget is that if we are doing it right, our children are growing and developing. And so we have to grow and develop with them and change who we are and how we relate to them as they grow into themselves more fully.
So I want to ask you a question, and I'll
Mhm.
give you a second to think about it. I'll answer it first. Tell me one of your proud mommy moments. And one of my proud mommy moments was happened like last week. I like man, you got to know the canon of black music in my house,
Mhm.
and so but you never know what sticks. And so the other day, my daughter like knew all the lyrics to like without Stevie Wonder being played. She was just singing at the table, at the dining room table, all the lyrics to "Ass" and like all these Stevie Wonder songs, and I was like, oh, it worked. I was like,
And it was
my,
unconscious.
my work is
Unconscious.
done.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. I love it. I love it. And you're just like, and just like that, they were present. They were listening. They were
They were
absorbing.
listening.
And your heart, your mama heart is proud.
You know, Stevie
Let's see.
Wonder's
I know something as simple, but you're like, yes, you can, you will be at the cookout, and you will do mama good. There are so many, I think, because I'm still in the early stages of parenting in terms of not being 0 to 5, but still in those really early days of elementary, and so everything is still discovery. Like
yeah,
there are new things weekly that we're doing. But my proud mama moment of the most contemporary nature would be just today. She loves Legos, and so we have found a little Lego workshop that she goes to weekly, and she goes, and it's just kind of a free for all as well as kind of a team build. And so while she's doing her thing, she's also being cooperative with other people. And so she builds her little structure. The teacher asks her a question about what do you want to build? And so she tells him, and then they begin the process of building it. And she's actually getting assistance from him, but also doing it herself. And then being able to turn to the girl next to her and say, would you like to build with me? And so again, you're seeing that where you're like, it's not just that singular play that kids do, but it's awareness of other people. And do you want to be involved in my world? And doing that and actually having a little moment. And then at the very end, him asking, does anyone want to talk about what they built? And her hand going up and being very confident and explaining what she'd done and what it represented. And then him saying, is there anything else you want to share? And she's like, nope, that's it.
that's it.
And so I was just like, oh my God, so many pieces there of the exploration, the working with the teacher to create something in her head. And then, like I said, the teamwork with someone she didn't know, and her own ability to express herself and verbalize what her mind's eye had created. And that it was enough. When she told you what it was, she was like, no, that here's my magical greatness. I drop the mic and I move
I
on.
dropped the
Like I
mic.
said, it felt like all the little pieces that sometimes you're like, this is not going to come together. They're
Yeah,
not going to do this and all that. And you're just like, wow, sometimes you just have to sit back, take your hands off and let them be and do what they're going to be and do. And it comes out. So like I said,
yeah.
something small, but literally all the things I was
They're
like, check,
not
check, 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 check.
small. They're not
Yeah.
small.
Yes.
They're not
Yes.
small. I
Yes.
gotta give a shout out to my other kid though. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
that. My proud mommy moment with her is always like she has an amazing amount of persistence when she turns it on. And one of those moments that just shined the light on that was like when she first broke a board in Taekwondo. And it was like, and this is the one that couldn't drink more than 2.5 ounces of milk, right? Like, and it was like, oh my
My
God.
baby's good. My baby
Oh,
is good. My baby is not a baby, but she's my baby. And
yeah,
they show you, and we're all sitting there holding like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? And they have the confidence and they do what needs to be done. And so, like I said, that's the start and the end of it, is that if you do this journey, and again, right, wrong, whatever you want to call it, just do the journey with them. Be present and be supportive, and again, use your resources as you need, and it generally shakes out pretty well. I know we're at time, but I wanted to just give you any final reflections you've had as you've kind of come full circle to who you are. And again, your girls are getting close to flying the coop, as we say. But what any final thoughts or just your experiences? And this is almost like the epilogue of a book. You've talked about the journey, and now you're in that reflective mode of looking back, and anything you'd want to share with people who again may be at similar stages.
well, I think about like something my kids have said. I'm not gonna have kids. Kids are so much work. And it's like I didn't want that to
True
be the
story.
impression. Yeah, I don't want that to be the impression of
But it is a
what it's
valid
like.
approach.
But you know, so we have to. One is we have to be careful about what we're modeling. But wow, like there's there's nothing like the pride you can feel for them. You know, it's just extraordinary. And yeah, I don't know. It's just like the payoff is just so great. I know that there's like challenges and everyone has something that they're going to be living into, but boy, when you have the sweet moments, there's like nothing like them.
Well, I want to thank you for imparting your life experiences and your journey and the beauty of it and the crunchiness of it, because it's not all smooth and glossy. And at the end, the resiliency. As I always say, I want to talk to people and let them understand that folks have had lived experiences, but it is the resiliency. It's the fact that you're still standing, you're still rediscovering yourself, your girls are growing and thriving, and you continue each day to impart a little bit more of who you are into them, and they impart themselves into you. So thank you again. I will, as I've said before, be tapping you, because again, I think there are a lot of little pockets that we've hit on that will be really useful for further exploration with you or with a panel of other conversationalists. So we will call this a night in terms of this conversation, but hopefully you will be present with my audience again at some point. So thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.